So I want to give a talk um, on the opinions of the wise. And I wrote down a little note. You cannot impress the world and impress the wise at the same time. So I want to say that again. You cannot impress the world and the wise at the same time. So, for many of us, we want to make an impression. We want to be liked, admired, respected. And the point I'm making here is you have to choose who you want to impress. The wise or the rest of the world, the foolish. And I'll share my screen here and I'll start to include some of the words of the Buddha and some others. And the first phrase I want to throw in here, which I've highlighted, is from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. So one of the most famous suttas or discourses from the Buddha. And the bulk of that discourse is on the practice of loving kindness, or what's called metta in Pali. But before he gets into that section, he has a verse which those of you who know my teachings, I like to talk about this quite a bit. But he has a verse where he describes what could be thought of as prerequisites for metta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, and so on. Um, and one of the lines that he uses is, let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. So reprove is like um, criticize or judge, penalize. So for one who is interested in developing metta and indeed in walking the path that the Buddha laid out, let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Okay. And I want to go on to a different sutta. This is the Nanda-manava-puccha sutta, Nanda's question. So this is from the Sutta Nipata, and it's from one of the most famous sections in which 16 Brahmins are sent to the Buddha to ask a question. Each of them asks a different question. Um, and these 16 Brahmins are, in their own right, very likely accomplished meditators and spiritual teachers who had their own students. But the 16 are the students of another Brahmin named Bavari. Um, and this particular sutta is the one in which a Brahmin named Nanda asks a couple questions, and I've just kind of uh, noted here the first two verses of the sutta. So here Nanda goes to the Buddha and he says, there are in the world sages, they say. In what way? Do they call one a sage for possessing knowledge or possessing a way of life? So, and again, the reason I'm sharing my screen here is that it's a little bit easier when you have the words on the screen, right? When I actually say it, it can sound a little bit like gibberish. But essentially, what Nanda is asking here is, um, you know, in what way are there sages? Are there wise people? Is someone wise for possessing knowledge, or are they wise for possessing a way of life? And this is the Buddha's response. He says, not on account of his views, learning, or knowledge do the skilled here, Nanda, call one a sage. Those who live disarmed, undesiring, untroubled, Those I say are called sages. So to recap, he says, the skilled here. Those with skills. And by the way, what are the skills that he's talking about? That we can think of Dhamma or this entire path of practice as a practice in which we are training in the skills of the Buddha. Okay. We're not training in the skills of warriors or of farmers, right? Like of skilled laborers in that time. We're training the skills of the Buddha, the skills of freedom from suffering. So, anyway, the skilled do not call someone wise or a sage on account of his views, learning, or knowledge. But the Buddha instead says, those who live disarmed, undesiring, untroubled. And for those of you who are used to reading suttas, in particular in the Sutta Nipata, there's a lot of phrases like this, so it can seem kind of obvious, like, oh yeah, here's just another time where the Buddha is saying, don't have desires, don't be troubled, right? But if we just linger here a little bit and really take this in, it's really profound, I find. It goes against the grain of society. Um, it's kind of like really pointing out who should we look up to? Who are the people we want to associate with? Who are the people we want to emulate? One of the things this question suggests is even back in those times, 2,500 years ago, um, and even by a Brahmin, right, a spiritual teacher, it was regarded that a wise person or a wise person was regarded as one who is possessing knowledge. Um, but from the perspective of the Buddha, knowledge is not equated with wisdom. Okay. Neither is learning, neither is views. And I'm chuckling here because, when I think about just about any podcast or documentary or, just in terms of who society deems worthy of listening to, it's on the basis of views. This is how we identify. If I'm a Democrat, then I'm only going to listen to other people who have Democrat views. As soon as I hear a Republican view, that person is no longer wise, no longer regarded, is no longer worthy of me listening to them, right? Um, and I would throw on to this like money is a big celebrity is conflated with wisdom or mistaken for wisdom. Um, if you think about people who get invited to conferences to give big talks, it's the Bill Gates of the world, the Elon Musks, people who have a lot of money. And nowadays it's pretty funny. Like if there's a lot of podcasts and people who have it's kind of like spiritual or mindfulness based podcasts, and they end up, not all of them, but many of them end up interviewing a lot of celebrities when they get to a certain level of popularity because the celebrities are the ones who are going to bring more clicks, right? More views. So you have people like Matthew McConaughey giving advice on wisdom, and you have like the Jay Shetty podcast interviewing the Kardashians and so on. And I actually don't want to criticize any of those people that I just mentioned, by the way, because I don't believe in cancel culture at all or just opposing any of these people. So I'm not saying that that's wrong or that any of those people or their views are wrong. That's really not the point here. I'm just to come back to the sutta, according to the Buddha, wisdom is not based on views, learning, or knowledge. and it's definitely not based on money or possessions. We know that from other suttas. So the Buddha says, those who live disarmed, undesiring, untroubled, those I say are called sages. Untroubled is a good word for us because that's something you can, to some extent, witness in someone. Okay. If you go to any social gathering, any party, and you observe the people there, in subtle ways, you can observe people getting troubled. You can observe that in yourself when you interact with others, your level of troubleness, right? So I'm going to move on from this. I think there's a lot more that I could say here. Um, but I want to just point this out, again, who is wise? I'm going to move on now to an excerpt from a talk that Thanissaro Bhikkhu gave. The talk is called Heedfulness for the Holidays. Um, and uh, I want to say more about heedfulness, but for now, I'm just going to read this excerpt. The opinions of the world cannot be taken as any kind of standard. This is a theme that Ajaan Lee would stress a lot. People will praise you for doing harmful things, and they will criticize you for doing perfectly good things. So if you're confident in the quality of your intentions, and you have shame and compunction to maintain good intentions, then that's your protection. People will criticize you, but you know that you've not really done anything that's opening you up to their criticism. So that's a kind of protection. Um, Now, as you may know, I'm a huge fan of Ajaan Lee, who was believed to be an Arahant monk from Thailand. Amazing teacher. There's an amazing, many books, and I think they're just about all online for free that you can read. And a teacher I have a lot of confidence in. And I love this statement. The opinions of the world cannot be taken as any kind of standard. The opinions of the world cannot be taken as any kind of standard. Now, this is something that um, can be put into practice. Just think about how free you would feel if you were able to put aside the opinions of the world. Like let's kind of for a moment, don't worry if about whether or not you can do this. Let's just for argument's sake and for the sake of imagination, what if you could put to the side the opinions of the world? Your managers, your friends, your parents, your children, whoever it is you're associating with, whoever it is that you rub elbows with, the random person on the street, you know, those their opinions are are not meant to be taken as any kind of standard. We actually live very much um, in an opposite way to this. We are injured by the opinions of others. I can, in my mind, I can still remember times while driving and some guy like flips me off, you know, or there's something about when someone blames us, that really injures the psyche, or when we get embarrassed, when we're made fun of, that it really wounds us in a particular kind of way. And it's precisely because of this that I want to harp on this point and drive it home, because again, it is so freeing to methodically, as a practice, delegitimize, de-emphasize the opinions of the world. And the key point here is we're not doing this to just be free of all judgment. The Buddha actually says it's a really helpful thing to be around those who are wise, who would admonish you, who would actually tell you when you're messing up. But the key piece is that those people are wise. And again, going back to that kind of prerequisite statement in the Karaniya Metta Sutta, let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove, that the wise would later criticize. So we want to be really sensitive to the opinions of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, to what they say is ought to be done. And again, you can't do both. You can't impress the wise and the unwise at the same time because they have different priorities. And, I can reflect on times where kind of teaching younger people as well, where sometimes someone would say like they're living at home with their parents, and it's like, oh, but my parents are, really, really on my back about my grades or about, what I want to do for my career, or, so and so, and all these different things. And sometimes it's the parents even, who um there's no other way to say it, who may not qualify as wise according to the Buddha. And sometimes it's your manager, your mentor, your older siblings, the elders in your community. And this can sound like a really radical thing, and in general, I do believe in respecting one's elders, but not to the extent that we would um, forsake wisdom. And we can remember that the Buddha's own father, King Suddhodana, really wanted his son, the Prince Siddhartha, to not go the spiritual route, right? He did everything he could in his power to um, sort of convince Siddhartha to go the other way, to become a world conqueror, to expand his kingdom. One of the things that has me thinking about this, as I've shared with some of you, is I've spent some time recently just not going to the events that I would normally go to, like social things. And nowadays I work from home, I work for myself. I don't, I've kind of spent a lot of time and energy to get to that, and hopefully I can, maintain that. And basically what I've noticed is when I'm not hanging out a lot with others, and when I'm reading a lot of suttas, when I'm practicing Dhamma, and in particular reading suttas, reading the words of the Buddha, it is, you put that together, and it's such a powerful, um I don't know how to say it. It really changes things in the mind. For me, it's like I really want to uh not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. I really want to align myself to the path of the noble ones, because that is the path where suffering can finally be defeated. When we allow ourselves to get pushed around by the opinions of the world, we suffer. It's that simple. I see the elongation and continuation of suffering in that method. And yesterday I actually went to a social gathering, and as I reflect on what it's like to be around other people, and you get into conversations, right? And sometimes the conversations are about career or just updating people on what you're doing in your life, or it could be a conversation about basketball or what's going on in sports or politics or whatever. Um, and people we're constantly judging each other, right? Whether we mean to or not, we're constantly kind of scrutinizing one another. So when you're having a conversation with someone about career, for the most part, with most conversations, there's a lot of measuring and comparing where we think we are with where we think someone else is. And if you go to so I'm Sri Lankan American, right? So if I go to a gathering of a bunch of Sri Lankan people, there's a lot of particularly older people, there's a lot of sense of, okay, this is what they want to see, right? Um, to give you an example, I remember kind of laughing that one of my uncles or family friends um, that I adore, that I'm a big fan of, but in a lot of ways, I kind of chuckled. He was this one person I'm thinking about was sort of the saddest person that when I told him that I stopped drinking a few years ago. Because a lot of like Sri Lankan men, that's a big part of the culture is drinking alcohol, right? And um, or if I talk to someone else in that community about what I'm doing with my career, there's a strong sense of, okay, this is what a career should look like. There should be a certain level of education and learning and progress and moving forward, you know? Or if you're talking with someone about your marriage or your relationship, then there's a societal expectation towards having children or doing whatever, right? And I'm not saying any of these things are the point of these statements is not to say that those things are wrong. Um, it's more to say that when we go out into the world, we are bombarded by the opinions of the world. Even if someone is not outwardly saying those opinions, you can kind of feel what every person's view is, what their conceptual framework is. So every person has a framework for what is good, what is bad, what one should be doing, what the way one should be spending their time. Everyone has their own view of this, and certain cultures and communities kind of coalesce around certain views, so they sort of solidify even more in certain circumstances. Um, and when you're intent on practicing Dhamma, you are picking up a whole different set or a whole different conceptual framework that is radical. And it doesn't really have a place in the framework that most people hold, even if it's other Buddhists. It may have a place, but for the most part, most people that you talk to, it's not going to have its place. Even for most Buddhists, Buddhism is just something you're supposed to do here and there. You're not supposed to be talking about it all the time. You're not supposed to, if you do it to the extent where you're meditating all day and you're not going to parties or gatherings and you're doing it too much, right? Because the typical kind of Asian sort of culture involves a lot of gatherings. right? Like I notice when I talk to my friends who are very into hanging out and partying and that kind of thing, there can be a huge kind of rejection at anything that's going to lessen the amount of hanging out. So if one friend gets really into his work, or another friend gets really into fitness, or another friend gets really into Dhamma, that's like an affront to that person's way of looking. I'm just kind of trying to think about examples in my own life, but there's like a million different ways that this can present itself. And I remember so many times in my practice feeling very lonely, like people don't understand this. It's hard for me to relate to others. And even in the context of marriage, it can be challenging, or in any relationship to feel like people don't understand what I'm doing. Which, by the way, there's another antidote for that, which I can get into if anyone has questions. But the main point here is we want to de-emphasize the opinions of the world and emphasize more the opinions of the wise. We want to allow that to change our conceptual framework. In a way, it's like, what is your North Star? Is your North Star the Buddha? Is it Nibbana awakening? Or is it something else? Is it the person who has financial freedom and the nice house and the beautiful wife or husband and the five kids and the whatever, And for me, like, there are aspects of what I just mentioned that are attractive to me and that I'm working towards in some way. But my North Star is the Buddha. In my conceptual framework, Nibbana is the thing that is most worthy, most worth working towards, because everything else is only as valuable as it's able to reduce suffering. And, most things aren't really effective in reducing suffering, but Dhamma is. And, what I'm saying here, it may seem negative or kind of harsh. Um, but really it's not. It's something very positive for us. And it's sort of a discussion that we need to have. You can't please everyone. And that's really hard for some of us. For many of us, we really want to please everyone. It's like you learn that when you're a little boy or a little girl, you want to be good for your parents. You want to be good for your teachers, but you can't please everyone. I remember when I was planning my wedding, talking to some family members, and it's like their values involve uh making sure no one says anything bad and about you and the family. So we need to be inclusive and include as many people as possible. And some of that is also from just a love of community and wanting everyone to feel happy and included, right? Then you talk to other family members and they're all like, no, this it'd be so dumb for you to spend all that money on a wedding and you need to be frugal, you need, have a small wedding. Um, remember talking to one family friend who had divorce in their family, and so his set of values was don't do anything big and pompous, and and don't invite a lot of people, right? So it's like, okay, there's no way for me to please both these people or both these two perspectives. And that's the way it is actually. But no matter what you do, there is no way to please everyone. The Buddha said, no one is blameless. Not even Buddhas are blameless, meaning that other people, there's always going to be someone who's going to criticize you. Even a Buddha is not free of criticism. In fact, in the suttas, when you read them, there's so many times where people are criticizing the Buddha, yelling at the Buddha, sometimes trying to kill the Buddha. Like it's crazy, and um I find that to be actually a very helpful point that I remind myself of often. Even Buddhas are blamed. As Thanissaro Bhikkhu said, the opinions of the world cannot be taken as any kind of standard. I'm just gonna quickly read a few other things from the teachings, and then we will close. This is something that Angulimala said after he became an arhat. Irrigators guide the water, fletchers shape the arrow shaft, carpenters shape wood, the wise control themselves. Okay, so the occupation of an irrigator is to guide the water, but the occupation of the wise is to guide, shape, control themselves, their own minds. This is another verse from the same section of the Dhammapada, the section on the wise. Everywhere truly, those of integrity stand apart. They, the good, don't shatter in hopes of favor or gains. When touched now by pleasure, now by pain, the wise give no sign of high or low. I love that this phrase, those of integrity, everywhere, truly, those of integrity stand apart. They, the good, don't shatter in hopes of favor or gains. This is just, keeping in line with the theme of we want to be able to identify the wise, right? Another phrase I like, rich in virtue. So this Dhammapada verse, one who would not for his own sake, nor that of another, hanker for wealth or a son or a kingdom, or even his own fulfillment by unrighteous means. He is righteous, rich in virtue, discernment, or wisdom. So just kind of saying the wise don't use unrighteous means for any gain. The wise are rich in virtue. Here's another one. Few are the people who reach the far shore. These others simply scurry along this shore. So the far shore is Nibbana. This shore is samsara, this cycle of birth and aging, death, suffering. I like that. Few are the people who reach the far shore. These others simply scurry along this shore. But those who practice Dhamma, in line with the well-taught Dhamma, will cross over the realm of death, so hard to transcend. Here's another one. Drinking the Dhamma, refreshed by the Dhamma, one sleeps at ease, with clear awareness and calm. In the Dhamma revealed by the noble ones, the wise person always delights. From another sutta now talking about association with wise people, with the Kalyana Mittas. With regard to external factors, I don't envision any other single factor like friendship with admirable people as doing so much for a monk in training who has not attained the heart's goal but remains intent on the unsurpassed safety from bondage. A monk who is a friend with admirable people abandons what is unskillful and develops what is skillful. So here, the Buddha is saying when we are around wise people, we remember the Buddha is he talks a lot about causes and results. So simply being around people who are wise is such a powerful cause. on the path towards awakening. From another sutta, if wanderers who are members of other sects should ask you, what, friend, are the prerequisites for the development of the wings to awakening? So, in other words, if someone from another tradition or spiritual sect comes to you and says, what are the prerequisites for awakening? You should say, to have admirable people as friends, companions, and colleagues. This is the first prerequisite for the development of the wings to self-awakening. And there's a couple sutras where the Buddha defines admirable friendship. I'm gonna try and paraphrase this one real quick from Anguttara Nikaya 8.54. And what is meant by admirable friendship? There is a case um, where a layperson spends time with those who, despite their age, are advanced in virtue. He talks with them, engages them in discussions. They also have conviction in the principle of karma, consummate in virtue, consummate in generosity, consummate in discernment or wisdom. This is called honorable friendship. So it's just a reminder, the Buddha has very high standards. And just to be frank, most people are not going to fulfill these standards in terms of what is a wise friend, an admirable friend. And I know sometimes I talk about the Kalyana Mitta as beautiful, as a beautiful friend. And I do like that word, that translation for Kalyana, beautiful. And I do regard that as accurate, but sometimes when we use these phrases, it can kind of lower the standard. It's like, oh yeah, I have so many beautiful friends, but I don't really think that's what the Buddha is saying. Um, Essentially, when you associate with the wise, you should see your virtue increase. You should see your skillful behavior increase. You should see your suffering decrease. When you look at it in this way, it becomes a very short list. But those people are your treasures. And I would also recommend, if you don't have a lot of those people, listen to Dharma talks, read suttas, find teachers that you like, listen to the Dharma. We are blessed with so many recordings, and if you keep doing this, you will start to feel yourself almost like out of nowhere. You'll just kind of work up an appetite to increase your virtue. Like, hey, there's this thing that I do that causes remorse. You know, I kind of just I always thought it was like, okay, it's not a huge deal. Everyone else is doing it, but I think I want to let that go. And then you let it go and you feel the the goodness, the momentum of that skill. You feel the freedom that arises with it. So I'll end here, and I hope you found this helpful. May all beings share in the blessings springing from this practice and teaching. By the power of these merits, may all beings be well, happy, and peaceful. May they find the unbinding nibbana. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami.